All right, so kind of picking off a little bit slightly where we left off here from the last video. Here's the men's picks for the NCAA tournament. So yeah, kind of like I tried to do last time and I wasn't very successful at. Give some overall thoughts here from this year's men's basketball season, just general thoughts. Well, the first thought is, holy shit, the SEC was amazing. The SEC was that was a knockout, drag-out fight almost every matchup, even down to the tournament where you had even like the lower seed, South Carolina was giving people trouble. Yeah, it was definitely not an easy conference to come out of. And the fact that 14 out of the 16 teams in the conference were selected out of the committee here, that shows a lot. That shows a lot. Yeah. Otherwise, you have a Duke team that's also a number one seed. I'm in a very, very small minority here. But I think this Duke team, yes, they're a number one seed, the number two overall seed. I don't think this is a Duke team that's worthy of a national title. Cooper Flagg is really good, and you got Knipple, and you got Brown. I think Malik Brown is his name. Sure, you've got those guys. But when those guys are out of rotation or they're getting shut off or they're just not, able to score as much, this turns into a, frankly, below average Duke team. And this is a team, I think, that's a one seed. This is a one seed that's kind of waiting to get knocked off, and that's regardless of injuries this year. Now, sure, a lot of people say, well, it's easy to say that in retrospect with like Cooper Flagg not playing in the ACC tournament. It is still an ACC tournament that Duke was able to win, et cetera, et cetera. But I still say, having watched them this year, number one, look at their conference. The ACC, and I don't say this as, like, again, a hater or anything, this is the weakest ACC conference in decades. Fucking decades. I cannot remember the last time that the ACC only had four. Yeah, I'll have some opinions on that here in a minute. Four teams get in, and it's like, okay, one of those we know just scraped in. But the other three, I have nothing against Clemson. I think Clemson's a team that can hang. They were the only team to beat Duke this year in conference. That is true. And yeah, Clemson, yeah, they dropped a couple games. Yes, and that does happen. Even in a weak conference. It's not, I don't love that happened, but yeah. And you have Louisville, and sure, Louisville, a lot of people said, well, look at how they did in the ACC tournament, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if I can fully trust this Louisville squad. I think them being seeded as an 8 seed, I think that's kind of appropriate. Because again, they won all but one or two of their conference games, but my God, seeing how weak teams like, and obviously, there were a lot of circumstances in Virginia this year, for example, where you had Tony Bennett kind of pull out literally in the last few weeks before the season began and say, "Oh, I'm done. I'm going to drop the mic and just retire as a coach or leave the school or whatever." It's like, okay, I understand, yeah, that you have some big circumstances there. This is still, yeah, that was a very big thing. How about NC State, who just had a huge kind of March Madness run last year, getting to the Final Four that almost nobody saw coming. And yet this year, they are a polar opposite where not only do they go to, okay, they can't even make their conference tournament, their fucking coach got fired. And this is a good coach, too. Like, yeah. And then you got everywhere in between, from a weak Notre Dame team to a weak Stanford team. It's just up and down the line. Florida State wasn't very exciting this year. There was just, Wake Forest had their moments, but obviously, they kind of petered out toward the end of the season there, and they tried to rebound, but they couldn't do it. It's like, I'm sorry, but that ACC conference this year, weak. No depth at all, as a lot of people said. It's just, when you have a conference that is that low, that is that inexperienced and just that poorly put together as far as overall talent across all the teams and everything, I don't think that should lift Duke up. If anything, that should show you, okay, yeah, Duke, they did lose only one game in this conference, that's sure. But there were expectations, genuine expectations, for a long time, as conference play began, that this was a Duke team that could go 20-0 in conference. And they didn't. They went 19-1, which is still obviously still very, very good. And that's still nothing that I say, you don't take that away from that Duke team. You don't say, oh, they just barely, True. And a lot of their wins, yes, were by by sizable margins. A lot of them were 15-plus point wins. That, we can't take that away from them either. I still say, though, this is not a number one seed in Duke that I'm going to trust to go all the way to the Final Four. Absolutely not. So, spoiler alert, I'm not picking them to go, that far. While we're talking ACC, let's go ahead and get the opinion that everyone and their grandmother wants to get out there. Should a North Carolina squad that had, and I know we haven't talked about it much like in this, and I don't think I'm going to talk about it way too much in this video or anything, because I don't know the stats off the top of my head about quad 1 versus quad 2, 3, 4, etc., wins and all that. But the stat over and over, I believe I know the number I've seen, 1-12 against quad 1 teams was North Carolina, the Tar Heels, and that was still enough to put them in the tournament. And I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, and a lot of people pointed out, look, let's not forget the chair of the selection committee this year is the AD, the athletic director of the Tar Heels of North Carolina. And yes, that athletic director had to seclude himself from conversations when it came to the rest of the committee discussing North Carolina's future and whether or not they were going to make the tournament and what their ranking was, et cetera, all that. I still got to call some bullshit on that. It's not, I'm not saying they're lying. I'm not saying that he wasn't in the room or anything, and all that. Because obviously if that ever came out, then the integrity of this whole thing would be done. The NCAA would never be allowed to pick this thing again. We'd go to some other totally different ranking system or something to pick who's in and who's out and who plays where as far as the seeding goes in this tournament. Or it might just destroy the tournament entirely, which would be a really sad thing. But you can't tell me that athletic director wasn't talking with these people on and off, day in, day out about his team and about his school when they weren't talking about it. You couldn't say in small talk at breakfast and dinners while they were secluded and stuff that he wasn't putting, obviously his school in their ear. I'm sorry, but it's just not appropriate. And I think something like that probably did happen. That's probably how this happened. On top of it also being, well, they're a blue blood, you have to put them in. And I'll put have to in quotes. I'm sorry, but no, you don't have to. It's okay for that to happen. Look at what just happened with the college football playoffs. Alabama wasn't in there. Did they survive? Did the whole college football experience survive? They did. Albeit this is the first year they're using this parameter and stuff, and they're definitely going to have to change some things up because there's no reason why your top 4 seeds should lose in those games. Obviously because football, like basketball, it's a momentum sport. You got to keep your momentum up. And I get that North Carolina, yes, they did show some momentum toward the end. They did, okay at home against Duke. They even had the lead, I think, or tied it or whatever, kind of late into that game. Still doesn't, and it's, obviously it's not the biggest parameter, but it still doesn't take into account that the 2 times that North Carolina played Duke, they didn't cover their spread for most gambling markets at least. And yes, it was a hurt Duke squad they were playing against in the ACC tournament for the semis, and they still couldn't beat them. And I still think, and I will, die on this hill. I know I can't remember the player's name. The player that committed the lane violation that arguably cost NC the game. Even if that hadn't happened, that only would have tied the game. You would have left Duke with, 15, 20 seconds to dribble it out, shoot a last-second shot, and then either kill you in overtime or still win in regulation with a last-second shot. I'm convinced that Duke would have won that game one way or another, by hook or by crook. They would have won that game. NC was not going to win that game. And I don't think that isn't, again, I don't think that's enough to put them in the tournament. I don't think that's enough to pass up teams like West Virginia, like Indiana, like a Boise State, who I haven't seen a bunch of this year, but the fact that they got as far as they did in their West Coast Conference, Mountain West Conference, tournament, getting into the championship and losing to Colorado State there. The fact that they hung around as late as they did, and the fact that everyone, all the sports networks and their bracketology experts were saying that it was either San Diego State or Boise State, one of those two only. And let me remind myself here, didn't they get in? Not Boise State, obviously, but didn't San Diego State make it in? Yes, they're an 11 seed. That's right. again, so much has happened here in the last 24 hours. It's like you kind of get those brain spots once in a while where you're like, okay, what's that again? But whatever. But yeah, it's still like, okay, the fact that they had San Diego State who lost by 3 possessions, as I recall, to Boise State, and Boise State kept winning, and that wasn't enough to put them in. If between them, West Virginia, Indiana, maybe Ohio State, they were the next 4 out. I'd say Boise State had the biggest argument as far as how have you been playing lately? What have you done for me lately? That argument, and getting as far as you did in a 4-bid conference. You easily could have been that 5th bid, Boise State, but no. Getting to the semis and winning, getting to the championship and losing, sure, to Colorado State, and I don't think it was a convincing loss either. Colorado State, as I recall, won pretty easily. That wasn't enough. And yes, I get it that San Diego State had some, whoever they beat very early in the year, they did, had a massive win earlier, as I recall. But still, that wasn't enough. Or even, as I recall, West Virginia, yeah, they were kind of up and down in the Big 12. They had some major road wins in the Big 12, which is nothing to sneeze at. And they also had a good win against Gonzaga early in the year, a win that looks even better when Gonzaga wins the West Coast Conference tournament. They didn't win the West Coast Conference overall. They won the tournament, though. It's like that's a win that should have gone way up in estimation. Even if West Virginia, yeah, they didn't do terrific in the Big 12 tournament. Yes, they have had some bad losses this year, some losses that you do kind of shake your head at. But you know what? Like we said with some of the women's games in the last video, almost every team in your conference, outside of maybe Duke, you're going to have those wins and those losses that you look at, you're like, oh, okay, man, that just feels a little weird. Auburn, they've had a couple of them as of late. They're the number 1 overall seed. Alabama out of the SEC, they've also had a couple of losses where you're like, yeah, that just wasn't very convincing. Florida, they've had some losses and some near losses that you just kind of like, you couldn't lead against against South Carolina until like 5 seconds to go. You had zero, time of lead in that game was literally 5 seconds out of a full 40 minutes. And yes, that was very early in conference season. That is true. And Florida has kind of never looked back since then. But yeah, it's like, okay, let's, Georgia has kind of been their one speed bump as of late. But still, yeah, I think all those things considered, when you take out their overall record, when you take out their 1-12 conference, quad 1 record, when you take in, take that stuff out, take their conference record out, I think they were end up being 13-8 or whatever. It's like, I'm sorry, that's still not enough to tell me that an Indiana team, that a Boise State team, that maybe an Ohio State team, and I've never been huge on Ohio State this year, and particularly a West Virginia team, that they were, enough to beat you out. The fact that they still didn't, that just shows favoritism by the committee, not just toward potentially some stuff with the athletic director, with him being the chair. I think it also just has to do with the fact that they're a blue blood, that it's kind of expected of them to make the tournament, that potentially you've got some jobs on the line if they do not make the tournament. And I don't want, I can't remember the coach's name right now off the top of my head, but he's been a long-time assistant there at North Carolina under Roy Williams and everything. I don't want him to lose his job. I'm not rooting for anybody to lose their job here. In fact, the 2 people I kind of wanted to lose their jobs this year, one of them did. Maybe the other one has now, but I haven't seen the news yet. Fran McCaffrey out of Iowa. I'm sorry, as an Iowa homer, I got to say, we need some new blood. And Fran, you've been wonderful. You got, with the Luka Garza and the Bohannon years and everything, wonderful times and everything. You've done your service, but we need new blood. The fact that your sons all left the program was the writing on the wall, and we all saw it. So it's like, yeah. The other one, sadly, also out of the Big Ten for some, is Steve Pikiell. I'm sorry, but Steve Pikiell still having his job right now at Rutgers shows that they're not really game, in my opinion. How can you have 2 of the top 3 projected NBA picks and not only lose to a lower seed your first game in the Big Ten Conference, but also not even make the tournament and have a losing record? I'm sorry, and I don't, I get that a lot of people for Rutgers apologists and everything will say, well, look at the rest of their roster. They didn't have a great roster outside of those 2, Harper and Bailey. It's like, I'm sorry, but no, that's not enough. When you have, you could argue, look at Duke with only 1 NBA prospect. True, he is the number 1 overall with Cooper Flagg. the squad around him, outside of maybe Knipple, it's like the squad around him is nothing that you would, put on posters or anything. They're just not going to be those high-level players that everyone else thinks, at least in my estimation. Not that I'm a total, complete expert in this, particularly with NBA draft stuff, because I don't really care about the NBA. But I'm sorry. With Steve Pikiell, Rutgers is a basketball school. They've never really been a football school. They're not really, an athletic school in many other major sports where they're like consistently winning. Maybe lacrosse or something that I don't pay attention to, maybe. And yes, they are a good academic school as well. That is true. But basketball, as far as the major sports that get, major attention throughout the year and stuff, basketball is their sport. And Steve Pikiell has done very well at that school. Again, when you have these expectations, and when you go in with, again, 2 of the top 3 NBA picks, and you don't even make the tournament, the NCAA tournament, and you can, lose in, overtime, double overtime, whatever it was, to USC, who's also not in the tournament, and a lower seed than you in the Big Ten tournament, that's a point where I'm like, okay, if I were a Rutgers homer, if I was somebody that was like, we deserve better than this, I would ask for Steve Pikiell's head on a pike, theoretically speaking, of course. But, and to be joking about it. But whatever. It's like, that's the one coach where I'm like, the fact that he has not yet been let go shows that Rutgers, and don't want to, I can't stress this enough. I'm not a guy that says fire the coach if you have a disappointing season. But I have to say, if I were in that school, that tells me that my athletic program is either A, way too patient, and maybe that ends up being a good thing at the end of the day. Maybe in the next few years he keeps recruiting very well, and they do stick around. They make multiple tournaments. They maybe even make a run or two in some of those NCAA tournaments in the future. All good things could come out of it. I don't want to, again, sound too pessimistic here. Or that just means they don't care as much, and they don't care that they're a basketball school. And, both of those results, I'm sorry, they're, I don't think either one of the results is a high likelihood of a great outcome. So, anyways, what else do I have to say? As far as the other major conferences, Big East was down this year as well, I felt. Creighton has had some great wins. UConn, whoa, all over the place. I can't remember the last time we had a 2-time national champion, and obviously I'm not going to know the long-term history of this, but a 2-time national back-to-back champion in the NCAAs for basketball, who keeps the coach, keeps, at least 1 or 2, maybe 3 players from 1 or 2 of those teams, and to be all over the roadmap this year, to have losses to Nova, who didn't make the tournament and ended up firing their head coach, to have their performance they had at Maui very early in the year. And I know some people will say, maybe that's not the biggest parameter ever because, again, it's so early in the year. But they went winless at Maui. Like, I never had that on my bingo card at all this year. The fact that they went winless was crazy. And then, to lose to Creighton again in the semis for the Big East tournament, they're up and down. They're going to be a hard team to grasp on this year. It's like, okay, do you sense then an emergency comeback where it's like all of a sudden that three-peat is now in dire jeopardy, and it's like, do they just turn on the afterburners and all of a sudden become the team that was, they were kind of projected to be through most of the year? Maybe that happens. But otherwise, St. John's, though, out of the Big East, what a story, man. And Rick Pitino, one of the best coaches still around. What a story for that school. They've been a fun watch here, particularly in the last month and a half, 2 months, when they've really, again, kicked it into high gear. Who else do we want to talk about here? Big Ten, I don't think they've had as great a season as a lot of people project. I mean, yes, they do have, the second most or third most, I can't remember. I think it's second most picks in the tournament. But man, I gotta say though, I don't think it's as strong a conference as a lot of people have let on. I mean, Michigan won their conference tournament, yes, but this is an up and down Michigan team. I don't know how far I can trust them. Purdue, I don't know how far I can trust Purdue. Wisconsin, they were strong at points this year, and it's like, yeah, they as happens every year with Greg Gard and his team there at Wisconsin, they have their roller coaster moments, but in particular coming into the Big Ten tournament, they came in very cold. That 20-point loss, whatever, to Penn State. Not a great look, or 10-point loss, whatever it ended up being. And then it's like, they start kind of getting hot again in the tournament, and then to fall to Michigan at the end there, to get cold right at the last part of that game, Ooh, I don't know how far I can trust them. Michigan State. Oh, Sparty looks really good, and then they lost to Wisconsin. They're in the Big Ten tournament, but Sparty's one of those teams out of the Big Ten. Though I'm like, okay, I feel a little safer with you. Oregon, they've been up and down this year. A lot of highs, a lot of lows, and some low lows. Low lows. Maryland, potential dark horse team. But again, something tells me not to totally trust them yet. Illinois, one of the most hot and cold teams in college basketball. The dictionary definition of a hot and cold team is Illinois. And a lot of that has to do with health and stuff too. But it's like, man, I don't know what to do with them. I think we've hit most everyone out of that conference. Big 12. The Big 12 is always a conference I go into. I come in kind of with higher expectations, and those higher expectations were met by Houston. I think coming in as a 1 seed, the number 3 overall seed, winning their conference tournament and everything. I feel like they're pretty reliable. Arizona had a rough start, but man, I kind of sensed, and obviously I don't do a through the season thing, but if I did, I would have said early, just because Arizona's down now, it doesn't mean they're going to stay down. They did not stay down, man. Caleb Love and the rest of the roster there, they got their shit figured out, and the win at home against Iowa State in overtime with that Caleb Love three-quarter shot that he made, banked in, or I can't remember if he banked it in or swished it in, whatever, three-quarter shot to tie the game and force overtime. That was the beginning of Arizona. That was the beginning of their revenge tour, so to speak, from their early and really rough start. And they never looked back. And I think Arizona is a very, very dangerous team out of the Big 12. I would not at all be shocked if they make it to the Elite Eight, or maybe this, possibly a if not there, a Sweet 16 berth, if they can get past Duke. And then speaking of Iowa State, man, Iowa State started with some high expectations, did very well at Maui. Pretty much had Auburn beat with a 19-point lead that Auburn unfortunately came back and overcame and ended up beating Iowa State. But Iowa State, man, they started early and they had some great expectations. As of late, they've had some major concerns with injuries. One of their key players is out for the tournament, and it was right as the brackets were released, they announced that. So it's okay, that's a major consideration. And they have, they have had some, again, really head-scratching losses this year. Who else? BYU. BYU feels like they're a team to really watch out for. They can be a very dangerous team. They kind of got hot right at the last moment there where you needed to get hot. I feel like I'm missing one or two here. Kansas had one of their most down years in history. Frankly, I wouldn't actually be shocked if Bill Self and the team kind of separate here in the next 2 years. That's how bad the season has gone for them. It's their expectations, again, Kansas is a basketball school. They're a blue blood school. So the fact that they had the year that they had, barely having a winning conference record, or maybe a winning conference record by 1 or 2 or 3 games, that shows you that it's oh damn, they're down. They're down this year. So yeah. We talked about ACC being down. So that just leaves the SEC, which we talked a lot about. And I think that's everybody, isn't it? Again, off the top of my head here, I'm trying to remember who have we not talked about. We talked about Big 10, we talked Big 12, we talked Big East, we talked ACC. Yeah. So yeah, SEC, yeah, and I think we've talked enough about SEC. So we'll go ahead and any other last? I'm trying to think if there's any other last minute impressions I want to, or general impressions I want to say. The other thing. For me personally, who does, I do some small bets and stuff on the side and everything with these games. Tennessee has been a team that has just completely screwed me over every time I try to bet for or against them, or even the over-unders sometimes. I just totally get those totally off. So I don't know what to do with Tennessee either. I mean, sure, they came into the SEC tournament and they really laid a good patch there getting to the final game where Florida kind of flattened them toward the end. But still, Tennessee's a team I would not sneeze at all at and be you're nothing. Yeah. Same with Alabama. I know Alabama's also had some injury concerns here as of late, but anyways. All right, I think that's enough of a preamble. Let's go ahead and get some picks in, shall we? We'll start with the South bracket. This is the Auburn bracket, the number 1 overall seed, Auburn. They're going to start with Alabama State. I expect Auburn to, again, kind of, as we talked about a little bit with the South Carolina for the women, kind of have something of a revenge tour in this tournament and make a good run here. So I think they will go over Alabama State easily. Then you have the 8 and 9 matchup, Louisville versus Creighton. Someone who's geographically close to Creighton. I've watched a lot of their games. Louisville, I've been disappointed in a little bit this year, even though, yes, they were the 2 seed out of the ACC when it came to their tournament and everything. And they've got Chucky Hepburn, who transferred out of Wisconsin, good player. The only thing that's keeping me from picking Creighton here, besides, okay, you do sometimes see those conference tournament winners or runners-up, have that either big continuation like NC State last year, or you see a gigantic fall like we've seen in some past years, like Purdue losing their first game as a 1 seed and stuff against a 16. You see one or the other, and it's like, for me, I think Creighton is going to have the other effect. I think Louisville, the fact that this is also in Lexington, that's just too much for me to say that Louisville's not going to win this game. So I'll pick Louisville painfully, but it's because it's a very close matchup between an 8 and a 9 here. But I like the 8 seed Louisville advancing. 5, Michigan against number 12 UC San Diego. My first instinct here, again, when you have that rise and fall method, the fact that Michigan is a team that, yes, at the top of their game, they can play very well and win the Big Ten tournament. At their lowest, they can lose to Minnesota and lose to Michigan State by like 20 points in the last game of the regular season. It's like, well, which kind of Michigan team are you getting? It's hard to tell. And I think my first instinct was to say UC San Diego in their first March Madness ever. I'm like, I kind of almost want to pick the 12 over the 5 here. And I did for a second, and then I went back. I'm like, no, I got to pick Michigan. I can't. I got to puss out, and I got to go with the higher seed here. So yes, Michigan I have advancing in this first game. But I would not be at all shocked. I'll be a little disappointed myself that I didn't end up picking it, but I wouldn't be shocked at all to see UC San Diego actually walk away with that one. But I'm going to pick Michigan. And then the 4-13 matchup, you've got Texas A&M, who got beaten by Texas in, 2 overtimes in the SEC tournament. Not a great look for them. Otherwise, still a very impressive season for them, though, against number 13 Yale, the Ivy League. And again, your Ivy League upsets, you always got to watch out for them. Princeton showed us that last year, or was it Yale? I can't remember who it was. Or maybe Princeton did 2 years ago, whichever it was. Princeton, I remember, didn't they get like to the Sweet 16 or Elite 8 or something? Like, they did very, very well here not too long ago. And this is a Yale team that I think a lot of major contenders are looking at. They're like, we want no part of this team. And Texas A&M, even though, yes, they're out of the superior conference, I'm going to go with the Ivy League here, go with Yale to beat Texas A&M and advance to the next round. Then you have number 6, Ole Miss against San Diego State. San Diego State has had some really great runs as of late in the tournament. And they, as I recall, those have been as kind of like 7, 8, 9 seeds, etc. They've been lower seeds, not high seeds. And 11 is kind of a good spot for them. But it's against Ole Miss, who's got, what the hell's his name, the coach? Used to be at Texas Tech, and then he was at Texas, and then all that stuff. Chris Beard, I think, is the name of the guy. Whatever his name was, as the coach there. I trust him. I trust the conference to be stronger here, though, and I do like Ole Miss to advance. Then you got number 3, Iowa State against Lipscomb, if I'm pronouncing that right. Iowa State, I think, will win this first matchup, even again without 1 or 2 of their key players potentially playing a full 40 minutes. Then you got number 7, Marquette against number 10, New Mexico. The other Pitino is coaching here. He's a former coach at Minnesota. And I think they let him go too soon. Minnesota also fired their coach here not too long ago as well. So it's like, that's, again, a very impatient athletic crew there. I like Marquette to advance here, but Marquette is another one of those teams this year. I just can't fully trust them. It's just they've had their down moments this year, and they're a team that kind of lives by the 3 and dies by the 3. I trust them to live by the 3 in this game. I don't know if they're going to do it much more, but I like them in this first round. And then number 2, Michigan State against Bryant. I think Michigan State will win. So there you go. So we'll, again, like we did in the last video here, I'm going to keep going through the bracket till we get our final 4. In other words, the winner of that particular bracket. And then we'll move on to the next bracket. So your your round of 32 matchups here in the South bracket is going to be Auburn versus Louisville. I like Auburn there, and I think, again, superior conference and everything, I think Auburn will advance. Then I have 5, Michigan against number 13, Yale. I hate to say it, Ivy League continues. Yale wins. This is one of my big upsets in the tournament. And oh, yes, one last note, very important, and of course I have to say it now and not at the top. I lost because I have a family pool that we do for brackets and stuff. My bracket got DFL, dead fucking last year, out of 20 people. And this is, full disclosure, I'm probably one of the 2 or 3 people in that pool that watched the most college basketball through the year, and I still finished last. So, yeah. So I'm trying not to do, because I was a little, the thing, my method last year was like going with just enough low seeds, just enough high seeds, and it's like, okay, out of my low seeds last year of the ones that advanced, like 1 out of 4 or 5 did, and my safe high seeds, like that I said, okay, they're good, that's where all the upsets happened. So I'm like, So yeah, it was a quick collapse last year. So in other words, don't listen to me way too hard. But I think I'm going to go with an Ivy League to get to the Sweet 16 again this year with Yale. So there you go. And then we have number 6, Ole Miss against number 3, Iowa State. And I hate to pull for an upset here again, particularly with a school that's geographically close to me. But Ole Miss, I think Ole Miss wins this game. And I think Iowa State, the fact they have been a little more inconsistent as of late, I think that's enough for them to exit here in the round of 32. And then Marquette versus Michigan State. This is the 7-2 matchup. And I think of the 7-2 matchups, this is one of my easier ones. I like Michigan State. Maybe not big, but I like Michigan State in that game. It will be, again, geographically, those schools are kind of close to each other, so it's like I can see there being a bit of a rivalry. I can see that one being a little closer than the spread suggests. I would imagine at this point it would be Michigan State would be favored in the spread, but I can see Marquette covering that spread, though. So just for that little tidbit there. In the Sweet 16 rounds, I have Auburn versus Yale. This is where I think the Ivy League does fall short. I have Auburn advancing to the Elite Eight. And the same with Ole Miss versus Michigan State. I like the higher seed to advance as well here. I think Michigan State will be able to handle Ole Miss at that point. So in the Elite Eight matchup here, the winner of the South bracket, I think will be Auburn. I was tempted to pick Michigan State. My first kind of gut instinct was, because Auburn has had, 3 losses in their last 4 or 5 games, whatever the stat would be. You can look at Michigan State and it's like, yeah, they've only lost, one of their last 6 or 7 or whatever it would turn out to be. So that's a better record for Michigan State. And yes, Tom Izzo is a great coach as of late in the March Madness tournament. And Bruce Pearl has had his failures as of late. He lost first round last year and everything. So as I recall, as a 3 seed. But I think this is a little bit better of an experienced Auburn team than we've seen in recent years. So I'd like Auburn to advance out of this. And again, bit of a revenge tour type idea with them as well. Going to the East bracket, this is where we find Duke. After that big preamble at the beginning, you're like, what, are they going to lose to a 16? No, they're going to beat American and advance to the round of 32. Then I have Mississippi State against Baylor. That's the 8-9 matchup. I have Mississippi State winning there as the 8 seed. Again, I got to go with the more experienced conference here. Baylor has been really up and down, very inconsistent. They're a team that can lose at home to TCU, who ended up being toward the bottom of the Big 12. But at the same time, they can also beat, and come back against Kansas, win down 21 at home. So they're all over the place. But Mississippi State and that stifling defense, I think, will be enough to shut down Baylor. Then I have number 5 Oregon against number 12 Liberty. I like Oregon here. Dana Altman, with his experience in the used to be the Pac-12, now in the Big 10, and his experience in March and everything, I can't bet against Dana Altman first round at least. So yeah, I got to pick Oregon there. Again, another team that, yes, at their highest, oh man, they've beaten Alabama in the preseason and stuff. But their lowest, losing at home to Nebraska, who ended up in the last stretch somehow not making the Big Ten tournament. Whoa. I mean, that loss has not aged well either. They have number 4 Arizona against number 13 Akron, the Zips. And I like Arizona here. I don't know if Arizona will be able to cover the spread. I think Akron, from what I've seen, they've been able to shoot really well. So it's far from a sure bet that Arizona advances easily, but I think Arizona will win. And then you have number 6 BCU against number 11 VCU. This is a spot some people I've seen pick the lower seed, pick the upset here, 11 seed VCU over BYU. BYU, yes, despite their bad loss to Houston in the Big Ten tournament, that was after they'd had a 96-point performance against Iowa State. Arguably, they left it all out on the court. Now they've had some time to recover. I can see them beating VCU first round. Then we have number 3 Wisconsin against number 14 Montana. Wisconsin again came into the Big Ten tournament on a low point and then got to an almost high point by being able to beat Michigan State. I think they'll handle Montana. Then you got number 7, St. Mary's against number 10, Vanderbilt. This was a tough one. This is a tough one. Because St. Mary's has been a team, I've not watched hardly any of them play because all their games are so late on the West Coast and everything, so I've not been able to watch them much, but they're the team that everyone can't shut up about and be like, they're the spoiler this year, etc. And yet they get a very tough pick in this first draw with the Vanderbilt team that, yes, did lose in Knoxville, first round to Texas, who ends up making the tournament, but yeah, this is a Vanderbilt team that's beat Tennessee at their home court. And what was the other one? Was it Kentucky? I think it was Kentucky, too, on their home court. So this is not going to be easy for St. Mary's. This is not going to be easy for St. Mary's. I still will pick them, though, because with Vanderbilt, they're also a hard team to, completely trust. So if they'd gotten maybe 1 or 2 more wins, if they handled Texas that first round and arguably kept them out of the March Madness tournament, maybe then I would say Vanderbilt, and maybe then they'd be a 9 or an 8 seed maybe at that point. Who knows how far they would have gone in the SEC tourney. But St. Mary's, I think, just by a hair, I think, is going to be my pick there. And then number 2, Alabama against number 15, Robert Morris. I like Alabama here. I think Alabama will bounce back from their conference performance there. So for the round of 32, you've got Duke against Mississippi State. Duke, I think, and even though, yes, it will be, obviously when they play this game, then you get almost a full week to recover. I think they're going to be shot by the end of this game, if my intuition is correct, because Mississippi State's defense, that's going to be a defense unlike anything they see night in, night out in the ACC. I'm sorry, but again, for you ACC homers, screw it. I'm sorry, but you're wrong. This is an SEC defense that is hard. Arguably, I would say them and Houston are probably the 2 toughest defenses you'll see in all of college basketball. Of the major conference players and stuff, in my opinion at least. And yeah, this is also a Mississippi State team that if they get their defense right and they can just hit all the gaps and everything and shut down the other team's offense, and then they can follow it up by just hitting at least 35-40% of their field goals, they're winning by sizable margins in those games. So I can see them shutting down Duke for a little bit. Maybe Duke struggles and has to win in the last, 6 to 7, 8 minutes. I still see Duke advancing, though. I still see Duke getting out of this first weekend and getting to the round the Sweet 16 round. So I have Duke winning there. Then I have number 5, by my calculation, number 5, Oregon against number 4, Arizona. I like Arizona here. I think Dana, he also fell in this round last year to Creighton, a former school of his, so that was kind of a fun game to watch. I believe an overtime game as well, or maybe it was double overtime or triple. It was I remember it being a long game. But Arizona, I think, can outshoot Oregon, and Oregon historically this year has been, a real good second half team. If Arizona just drowns them in the first half, I think that's going to be too much for Oregon to come back from. So there you go. Then number 6 BYU against number 3 Wisconsin. I like the low seed again here. I like the 6 over the 3 again here. I like BYU. I think BYU has shown a little bit more consistency than Wisconsin has in the last few weeks. So, yeah, I like BYU to advance there to the Sweet 16. And then the last one here would be St. Mary's, 7 against the 2. This one is not particularly hard for me. I think Alabama, again, they're going to have some feelings about everything, and I think they're going to advance and get to the Sweet 16 again. Then we have Duke against Arizona. This is where I'm like, okay, Duke, this is the make it or break it kind of game. Because if they can get past Arizona, and then we'll see what happens on the other side of the bracket, because especially if it's like Duke against BYU or something, or maybe St. Mary's, or maybe Wisconsin, I can see Duke advancing. But they got to get past Arizona. That's the make or break point. And I'm projecting Arizona to beat them. I have Duke falling, and spoiler alert, I believe this is, this is the first 1 seed I have falling in the tournament. I think it'll happen. I think they get out of that first weekend, but they don't get any further. And I think they'll still be, even though, again, you get a big stretch of time off between Mississippi State and Arizona, if it ends up being those games and everything, yes, then I think, you've definitely got some troubles there recovering from that, and I think it will be Arizona that'll get them. And then I have number 6, BYU against Alabama next. I think Bama will be able to get past and outshoot BYU. 2 very high-scoring offenses, by the way. I think I'd have to double-check here. Maybe we can come back to this later on. But I don't think I have 2 higher-scoring offenses going up against each other at this point in the tournament. A Sweet 16 matchup or whatever. So, yeah, I like Alabama to win there. And then Arizona against Bama, that's the 4 against the 2 coming out of this bracket. I actually like Alabama in that game. I think Arizona, they're a team that, yeah, they'll get those good runs going, and then they kind of hit that speed bump. And Alabama arguably didn't hit near as many speed bumps through the regular season or the preseason as Arizona did. So I like Alabama to win that one. And I have them as the finalist out of the East bracket. Next, we'll go Midwest. This is where we find Houston as the number 1 seed here. They go up against first-timer SIUE. I forget what that stands for. I think Edwardsville or something out of Indiana. And, yeah, I think Houston will win. Houston will win pretty well. One of the most interesting first-round matchups, particularly out of this bracket, I think, comes here with Gonzaga, Georgia. Boy, you've got Mark Few and that experience with Gonzaga in a pretty much a down year for Gonzaga. It's a year where you didn't hear much about Gonzaga because St. Mary's swept them in the regular season, as I recall. They did come back to beat them in the West Coast Championship tournament. But that being said, I think with that experience speaks volumes here, and I think Mark Few will get enough in him to get them past a tough Georgia team. A Georgia team that, by the way, did beat Florida. And Florida right now is kind of the popular pick for who's going to win this tournament. So I think that's worth something, and I think it's not going to be an easy fight. But if Gonzaga, if they hit just enough of their threes, which were not landing in the West Coast Championship game that I did watch most of, luckily for them, St. Mary's. Luckily for them, they also were not hitting threes, or else Gonzaga might have been run out of the building the way they were shooting them. So I think the threes come back for Gonzaga, that at least that first round, potentially that second round as well, if they hit up against Houston. And I think it's a tough out for Georgia there, but I think Gonzaga does win. So I have the 8 advancing there. Next up is the number 5 seed Clemson against number 12 McNeese. McNeese was kind of one of my dark horses from last year. I didn't pick them, and I turned out to be correct. I'm not picking them again this year because I think Clemson can hang. I think Clemson is one of these teams that people have looked at out of the ACC, and it's like all the attention, if you're not on Duke, went to Louisville. I'm sorry, but Clemson, I think, does earn, should get more respect here. And I think the fact they are a 5 seed and Louisville's an 8 seed, I think that shows the committee's with me. So I like Clemson to beat McNeese. It's not going to be an easy matchup. I've seen some take the 12 over the 5 here, but I like Clemson to win. Then you have number 4 Purdue against number 13 High Point. Now, stay with me here. Purdue is a team that either does very well in the tournament or they're out first round. And when you look at it, 2 years ago, they were a 1 seed. Zach Edey, they had a lot of attention. I think they were the number 2 or number 3 overall seed. No. They were the number 4 overall seed. That's right. They were still a 1 seed, but they were the lowest rated 1 seed. They lost first round to a 16. Second time ever in NCAA tournament history that had happened. And what happened the next year? They came all the way back and got the runner-up in the championship. Now this year, Matt Painter's team, they have been still in a kind of down year in the Big Ten, arguably. They've still been kind of a quiet team. A lot of the attention has been on Wisconsin. It's been on Sparty, Michigan State. It's been on Michigan. Not near as much on Purdue. And I think it's a weaker Purdue squad than it may seem on paper. I think they are a little overestimated as a 4 seed. You got number 13 High Point, which I've watched. I watched just their kind of their semis and their regular season championship and stuff. Or not regular season, excuse me, their conference championship. I think High Point, this is the 113 seed that I really like in this tournament to win, other than Yale. Yale, I think, is a 13 as well. Give me the 13. Give me High Point. Give me High Point to beat Purdue. And the other thing, too, Purdue, I also don't know if Purdue were to go up against Clemson in the second round, if it was the 5 or the 4. I don't know if Purdue would get out of that one either. I think Clemson can outshoot them. So there you go. That's my opinion on that. Then we have number 6, Illinois, against the 11 seed, Texas. And it's Texas or Xavier, as I recall. Isn't Xavier also in the first 4 here? Where are they at? My thing here doesn't give me the other matchups here, I don't think. That's right, yeah, because where's... I think this is a projection thing, yeah, because for whatever reason, because I think Alabama State, aren't they, we talked about them earlier, aren't they also in the first four matchups? I don't know why they're not given the full teams here, but that being said, I do think between Xavier and Texas, though, I think Texas has more experience. They're definitely coming out of the stronger conference. Xavier is one of those teams that they've been on the bubble for a long, long, long time here in the last few weeks, them and Nova both out of the Big East. And Texas has been one of those teams. They were more solidly in, and they've kind of fallen toward the bubble. And then with that SEC tournament performance, I think that definitely saved them from being out of the tournament. That being said, I can see Texas being one of those weird teams, those 11 seeds, kind of like UCLA did a few years ago, where they go on a massive run and they really outperform expectations. That was the last time we had a first four to a Final Four, was UCLA. And I believe if that was the same year... Was that the same year they played Gonzaga then in that Final Four matchup, which is probably the best Final Four game in tournament history? Arguably one of the best games overall in tournament history ever? I think that was that same year. They had an absolutely unbelievable run. Could Texas go on one of those? Potentially. But they drew Illinois. And again, Illinois is a hot or cold team. If Illinois is kind of down that particular day when they play, Texas can sweep them and win by 15 points. But if Illinois is firing on all cylinders and they're hot, Texas is in trouble, and they will lose by 15 to 20 points. So it's like, this was a tough one for me as well. I like Illinois in this game, though. I do like them to win this one just on a whim, because Illinois has been another team this year that's been very costly betting-wise for me. So I'm picking them with some caution in that game. Then I have number 3, Kentucky against Troy. I like Kentucky here. I think Kentucky's a team that feels like, yeah, they've had some high moments here. They swept Tennessee in the regular season, but at the same time they've lost at Vanderbilt. They've had their weaker moments here. I don't think they're entirely a team that I'm again going to completely trust. They might be a little slightly overvalued as a 3 seed, but I still think they'll get past Troy. Then you have number 7, UCLA against Utah State. UCLA is famously a team this year that will lead for a while or kind of come back, take the lead, and then the waning moments they will struggle a little bit. So I think Utah State's going to give them a good fight, but I think UCLA will win. Then you have number 2, Tennessee against Wofford. I like Tennessee to win that game. All right, so that would mean for the round of 32 matchups, we have Houston against Gonzaga. And in that game, I think Houston will win. Again, Gonzaga, if they're shooting their threes, then Houston will have to really rely on their defense. And if they can just shut down enough of Gonzaga's possessions, I think Houston can walk away with a 2, maybe 3 possession win. Clemson against High Point. I'm sorry, High Point. I think this is where you fall off. I think Clemson will win that game and advance to the Sweet 16. Illinois, Kentucky. This is a very interesting matchup. And even more interesting, every way I looked at this, I couldn't see Kentucky getting out of this game. And I like Illinois in this game. Illinois was also a team I did not bet on heavily last year. I didn't think they were going to go extremely far, as I recall. They made it to the Elite Eight and beat out Iowa State, as I recall. Was that to get to the Elite Eight? I think it was to get to the Elite Eight. Yeah. So they were definitely a dangerous team last year, and I think even though they're very young, they're still a team that, again, when they're firing on all cylinders, they can level some teams. So I think Kentucky is one of my surprise picks to not make it out of the first weekend. I have Illinois going to the Sweet 16. And then I have UCLA against Tennessee. I like Tennessee in this game. UCLA, probably not their year to beat a powerhouse like Tennessee. So in the Sweet 16 matchups, I have Houston against Clemson. Interesting matchup, but I like Houston. I like Houston there still. And then number 6, Illinois against Tennessee. Again, Tennessee has been kind of unkind to me in the betting markets and stuff, but I still think Tennessee will be able to win this game. So I have number 1 and number 2 advancing here to the Elite Eight. Houston and Tennessee, and just like I had in the South bracket, I had also that one down to the 1 and 2. And I think Houston will win. I think Houston will win that game and advance to their Final Four. Okay, then coming into the West bracket, final bracket here. Florida is your number 1 seed here, and man, I don't know. I could almost argue that Florida, the way they won that SEC tournament, the way they punished those teams in only, 2 or 3 games, 3 games in the SEC tournament, God damn, they just look so unbeatable right now. And I know, again, it's a very popular pick. Almost all the experts I saw yesterday, their first instinct was to pick Florida because they're so hot. And it is a game of momentum. That is all true. But I still think this first game, they're going to beat Norfolk State. How far they go after that, it's going to be a real mystery. We'll see. But yeah, I still think, though, of all the brackets, I think this is the one that when Florida is in this bracket, this is one of the easier brackets for them to get out of, though. It really just depends on this next matchup, who they get second round. And that's going to be UConn versus Oklahoma. One of the most interesting, I believe I can't remember if this is a Friday or a Thursday matchup, but whatever. One of the most interesting matchups. The most interesting is a little later on down a couple more games on this particular bracket are very interesting as well. But UConn, Oklahoma, man. Oklahoma, a team that started red hot, won the battle for Atlantis in the preseason. It's like, damn, they're going to do some damage. All of a sudden, next thing you know, you blink, they're 0-5 in the SEC. And it's like, okay, the wheels came off for that team. And they had to really struggle and really fight to get into this tournament, and they ended up as a 9 seed. And I think, again, because of that preseason record, beating who was it they beat in the Battle for Atlantis? I forget. But holy crap, they had a great bunch of games there. Unfortunately, yeah, arguably peaked too soon, but still. This is where I think experience, again, I'm going to rely on experience, and UConn has players and a coach that knows how to win in March. So I'm going to pick Dan Hurley, as much as I hate his fucking guts, that guy. I'm going to pick him and the UConn Huskies over Oklahoma. The 8 over the 9 advancing to the round of 32. Memphis, Colorado State. Wow. With Hunter, who's the star player for Memphis, potentially out for maybe not just the first game, but for the tournament, depending on how far Memphis goes. That makes this game even more interesting because Colorado State is one of those teams that if you watched them out of a 4-bid conference, they slammed the door on everyone they played in the Mountain West tournament. They're very interesting. And this is a very, very tough call. And I would not be shocked if whoever wins this game ends up being a team that can beat potentially Maryland or Grand Canyon next round and get to the Sweet 16. I would not fall over from shock at all if that happens. But in this particular matchup, I think Hunter will come back. I think Memphis will be able to hang. They've had some great wins this year. They weren't perfect in their conference, which was a little bit of a weaker conference this year with Dusty May leaving FAU and Vlad Golden also out. They're both at Michigan now. I don't know. I still think Memphis is going to have just enough in the tank to beat Colorado State. Very close call. I know my friends in Fort Collins are yelling at me right now, but I think Memphis is going to just squeeze it out. Again, I would not be shocked if this is an overtime game, if this is a down to the last 30 seconds game, who has possession and who can set up a last second shot, et cetera, et cetera. I think Memphis is going to be very close in this game, and I think they'll win. And I have them over Colorado State. And then we have number 4 Maryland against number 13 Grand Canyon. And actually, again, my first instinct here was actually to pick Grand Canyon. They came out of a little bit of a tougher WAC conference than it looked on the surface. Utah Valley gave them a hell of a fight. That was a really late game I watched over the weekend. And this is, by the way, Bryce Drew. My first instinct for who Iowa should really gun for to try to get to be their next head coach, go for Bryce Drew. A lot of other teams that are open this year, like Nova and Minnesota and Indiana, particularly he comes from Valparaiso, so that's another Indiana school. So I think Indiana is probably the first team I would guess that if he's going to transfer out of Grand Canyon and take another job, he would go for Indiana because it's close to home for him and everything. But if he wants, and Indiana's had some job offerings before where he potentially has gotten passed up. If that's true, Iowa will welcome him with open arms, and he can beat Indiana all he wants. I just say that as a jest. But still, Bryce Drew is one of the most underappreciated coaches. He's gotten this Grand Canyon team to the tournament 3 years in a row. 3 years in a row. That should say something. And I was really close. I was up to, before the cameras rolled here, I was really thinking Grand Canyon is one of those other 13, but I was like, I don't know if I can have 3 13 over 4s. I just can't, mathematically, I can't do it. So I'm going to stick with Maryland. Maryland is also a very, very excellent team. When Queen, or I think Queen is the star player there, when he and the rest of the squad are lighting it up, man, Maryland is tough to beat. Very tough. And they're also a very high-scoring team, which Grand Canyon also can be. So that could also be a very high-scoring offensive game, round one. But I think I got to go Maryland here. I got to go Big Ten represent. I got to go Maryland. But it's a close call. Speaking of other teams close to home, literally the team that is closest to me geographically by just a mere miles is Drake, who's the 11th seed. They're going up against number 6 Missouri. Missouri has been, I would say, surprisingly, they're a team that obviously bounced back huge from last year. They're a team that looked undefeatable for a little bit. They beat Alabama, and it's like, okay, now all of a sudden expectations were raised, and they've kind of failed to meet those expectations since. They haven't really had the best close to their season, and they lost relatively early in the SEC tournament, earlier than a lot of people would have suspected. So they kind of come into this tournament a little colder than a lot of people would have thought, and being a 6th seed, if they had won maybe 1 or 2 games in the SEC tournament, they could have come in as a 4 seed. They really could have come in with much higher seeding. As it is, they are a 6 seed. They have to go up against Drake. And this is a Drake team that won more games than basically anybody else except Duke this year in all of college basketball. They were the last undefeated team, as I recall. This is a Drake team, even with the coach and a lot of the roster gone, has sustained, and they've done very well in the Missouri Valley. Lost very few games there. Just because they're a local team, I got to pick them. I got to pick the Drake Bulldogs to upset here over the number 6 Missouri team. And I know I'm going against the stronger conference. I know you got Caleb Grill and Tony Perkins and a bunch of other great guys on that team and a good head coach. I got to pick Drake. Just because local thing. I got to do it. So this was another low seed. I'm like, I got to do it. And it kind of affected. That's part of the reason why I'm like, I couldn't pick and it wouldn't necessarily be the next matchup, but I'm like a 13 and an 11 advancing in the same bracket. I'm like, I just don't have the balls to predict that. I'm sorry. Next up is number 3, Texas Tech against UNCW, North Carolina, Wilmington. I like Texas Tech in this game. I like Texas Tech to win that one. Now we get the matchup in round 1. The matchup, the marquee, the tell of the tape, the main event of round 1. Of all the games, the most interesting game, the most interesting matchup, and this could potentially be the most interesting matchup for any matchup up till we get to like an Elite 8, a Final 4 level. Kansas as the 7 seed against 10-seeded Arkansas. Holy shit, what a game. And it's like, okay, this is a Calipari-led Arkansas team, and I joked about it off camera for all through the season here. When Calipari and Arkansas started slow in the SEC, my first instinct and my mantra for most of the season, sorry, John Calipari, but my mantra for most of the rest of the season was John Calipari, he only coaches losers. I'm sorry. I immediately had to take it back once once Arkansas kind of started finding their footing there in the SEC. And the fact they've gotten this far, it's like, okay, that tells me something. And again, as we mentioned a little bit, this is almost undoubtedly the most unevenly coached Bill Self team in years. I mean, going back to maybe his first couple years at Kansas. This is a roster that on paper, this was as I recall, the number 1 preseason ranked team, and they stayed very high in the rankings for way too fucking long in the AP polls. I'm sorry, but those AP polls are still kind of garbage when we come to these sometimes. The fact they were still ranked in the top 10 through, early January? I'm sorry, but if that was true, you're not watching enough games, because Kansas did not deserve to be ranked that high, basically, up until, I don't know, you could argue maybe they're winning home against Iowa State, and that was a late January, early February game, somewhere in there. That was maybe when you can kind of say, okay, they're starting to get back on track, but this is a Kansas team, man. To lose like they did at Utah, to lose like they did against BYU, as I recall it was Utah, maybe it was somebody else, but to lose like they did against Baylor with a 21-point lead blown multiple times. Not meaning they scored, they led by 21 multiple points in that game, but they led by 21, famously collapsed, took the lead again and got a ways ahead. They went ahead by, again, another 2-3 possessions. It was like 6, 7, 8 points, and they still lost. It's like, I'm sorry, but this is not a team that I look at and I'm like, okay, this is a solid team. I'm sorry, but no, I cannot say that with any certainty at all. So I looked at it, and it came down to one factor: experience. And Calipari, as of late in the tournament, has had very bad luck in the first couple rounds. Lost very early with a strong Kentucky team last year as a 2 or 3 seed last year. And famously, I remember one year I picked him to win the whole thing as a 2 seed, and they lost opening round to a 15 seed. So it happened again. Oakland was a team that got him last year, I recall now, but yeah. And Bill Self, this is a guy that, remember, just 2 or 3 years ago, won the national title at Kansas. So for this first round, I'm not comfortable picking either team. This is you really can't say comfortably that either one of these teams is like easily going to win this game. I don't think so. But Kansas is my pick to win this game. And then we have number 2 St. John's against Omaha. I got to go St. John's to win that one. From what I've heard, Omaha will give them a good fight, though, so we'll see. So next up here, we have the West brackets round of 32. Florida against UConn. Very interesting matchup on paper, especially if UConn turns themselves around. Like, let's say they beat Oklahoma by 15, 20 points. Let's say they really hang it on Oklahoma. If they come into that game against Florida with momentum, that could be a gigantic bracket breaker. I mean, that could be one of the biggest, huge, just gigantic moments in the last couple of years, outside of the 1 versus 16 matchups where the 16 is won a couple times against Virginia and against Purdue. I really can't think of that big a bracket breaker that early, where it's like that low a seed winning. But I still think Florida will be able to outmatch UConn. Again, this is an inconsistent UConn team compared to the last few years. Then we have number 5 Memphis against number 4 Maryland, and again, the close call here with Memphis making it. But regardless of whether it was Colorado State or Memphis, I think Maryland will be able to take care of business, so I like Maryland advancing there. Number 11 Drake against number 3 Texas Tech. If my math holds up here, I like Texas Tech to win this one. And even if it was Texas Tech against Missouri, I still think Texas Tech will find a way to win that game. This is a team that beat Houston at Houston in overtime, and that's without their top scorer for 90% of the game, and without their coach for 90+% of the game. So there you go. And then you have, and by the way, I still the game of the year to me has been that first matchup at Houston when Texas Tech came to town. That was absolutely one of the most incredible experiences watching. Because just a brief time out here, just to see their head coach, whatever his name is, to see him and Toppin ejected less than 4 minutes into the game, and to see them hang around, and to see it was what's his name, not Sharp, but the other guy, to see him get hurt for Houston, basically be on one good leg for the majority of the second half. And, they go to overtime, and it comes down to a last-second shot and everything. Yeah, that was crazy. Houston has played some crazy games, too. That overtime win against Kansas was in Kansas was crazy. Absolutely crazy. That was also just a phenomenal finish for that game. Unfortunately for my bet, it didn't hit, but because I had actually taken Kansas to actually win that game, because I think they were already they were like a point favorite or something. I took them to win by like 3 or something, and with so many seconds left, I was like, yes, they're going to hit, and then they gave up 2 threes in like 5 seconds, 6 seconds, whatever the hell it was. It was like a nightmare scenario for Kansas. But anyways, that being said, let me go again. It's Kansas against St. John's for that round of 32. St. John's. Rick Pitino is going to have, as much experience as Bill Self has, Rick Pitino has as much, if not more experience. So there you go. The Sweet 16 matchups here are going to be Florida against Maryland. I like Florida over Maryland. Closer game than maybe some would suspect. Maryland's going to stick around. They're not going to just lay down and die. So there you go. And number 2, St. John's against Texas Tech. I actually at one point was thinking Texas Tech can win this game. They, again, come out of the tougher conference. They've had, again, a major win or two here or there. I still think St. John's will win, though. I have St. John's going to the Elite Eight. So then it's Florida against St. John's. And this is a tough one. You could argue whoever wins this game could make their way, depending on who comes out of the Auburn bracket, the South bracket. They could find their way into the championship game if they can just beat the other team. And right now, again, I look at it. I know it's recency bias. I know it's the popular pick right now, and sometimes going with that popular pick, it worked for a lot of people last year with UConn. UConn was the popular pick to win it all last year. I'll go Florida. I'll go Florida to win. So I have in my final 4, let's recap here. Out of the South, I have Auburn. Out of the East, I have Alabama. Out of the Midwest, I have Houston. Out of the West, I have Florida. So it'd be Auburn against Florida in the first round, one of these matchups here in the final 4. And this is close, man. It's really close. I like Florida over Auburn. I think Bruce Pearl and this team, they've done very well this year, obviously, number 1 overall seed and everything. I like Florida. I think Florida just comes in with too much momentum. This is a team, by the way, was also confident enough in their roster to redshirt a 7-foot freshman. That also speaks volumes here. So that also was part of my decision-making there with how far Florida was going to go. And on the other side, you've got number 2, Alabama against Houston. I picked Houston to win the whole thing last year. They exited, the Sweet 16 round. Very disappointing for me. But I think Houston bounces back this year. They get to the championship game. They beat Alabama. So I have Florida and Houston in the championship. And man, when you look at these two, you've got one of the best defenses against one of the all-time great offenses this year. And that's really tough, man. But I think in this sport, maybe more so than the NBA, defense does count. That is true. But anymore, offense also really counts. And as much experience as Kelvin Sampson has coaching this Houston Cougars team, and as well as they've done in the previous years, I think Florida will be your champion. I think Florida wins the March Madness tournament. Again, I know it's the popular pick. I know it's the easy pick for some people. I'm sorry. I got to pick Florida. So there you go. Those are my picks for the 2 March Madness tournaments. And I don't know. I guess I don't have much else to add. Just some fun videos here in the meantime. Obviously, we've got a ways to go before the next Oscars season begins. A long time before Conan O'Brien hosts again. Nikki Glaser's going to host the Globes again. We know that already. But, yeah. I don't know. Like I said, I've got another series planning to come out here over the summer. Hopefully in the next couple days I can start work on that. Maybe after some of these games have been played, right? When we've got some downtime and stuff. So, yeah. All right, that's all I got for now. So we'll be back obviously later on in the year. And keep an eye out. Keep an eye out for that series. Again, high hopes that it will release. No definite release date or anything just yet. But I'm really hoping that we're ready for this thing by maybe late May, early June. Maybe somewhere in there I'll have everything finalized. And then shortly after, when we get maybe into mid-June, maybe late June, early July, we could start to see that series come out. So it'll be soon. I promise.